আমি লাইভ হইছো।
Okay. Okay. Hello, everyone, and very good evening. So, on behalf of I am very, very happy to welcome Dr. Gaurav Baruah. And so he will be talking about challenges in forecasting future biodiversity collapses in the face of climate change. And I'm going to introduce him a little bit and then he will take over for his presentation. So Dr. Gaurav Baruah is a postdoctoral scientist working at the Department of Fish Ecology and Evolution, EWAG, from Switzerland. And he received his PhD from the University of Zurich, Switzerland, and BSMS from IISER, Kolkata. He has a broad interest in topics spanning over theoretical ecology and evolutionary biology. And however, he is more interested in understanding mechanisms that maintain biodiversity at the temporal and spatial scales. And from his talk, we will understand a very clear picture of what he's talking about and what his interests are. And it will be great to have questions after that too. Yes, I will let Gaurav take over from here, and Gaurav, you can decide on however you want to do it. If you want to talk about your journey first, or maybe after the talk.
I mean, interrupting. One second, Gaurav. Weekend, I think it is not started.
And
yeah, it's done now. Yeah.
Yes. Take over.
Yeah, you can continue, Gaurav. Yeah.
Thank you for this beautiful introduction, Pavit. I thank you for inviting me to give a talk by the Assam AI initiative, and I'm privileged to give a talk to you all that are present here. And it's an honor to share some of my work and talk about global challenges in the face of climate change. Before I give you an overview of what I worked and what are the challenges in forecasting collapses of biodiversity, I'd like to briefly tell you about my background. So I actually, when I was started my bachelor's in IISER Kolkata, I had absolutely no clue about what ecology was, except for textbook readings, textbook understandings of what ecology meant in a way that we used to skip when we used to study in our school. And only in my bachelor's, when I was doing my bachelor's in biology, I was mostly, interested in molecular biology, as almost 80% of anybody who studies biology in India knows or talks about. And ecology was something very strange to me in a sense, because in our department or in our place where I studied at IISER Kolkata, there was only one or two ecologists, and one of them was my master's supervisor, Robert John Chandran. He was from Karnataka, and he's a brilliant scientist, and he was the one who motivated me to work on ecology, and he used to talk about challenges about predicting biodiversity. And when we look around in the nature, we see so many different plants, in a single square meter area, for instance, and you see lots of plant species. And he introduced me to that, how it's an amazing question that remains unanswered. It's like, how do species, like all these different species, can coexist together, despite this despite in this small space. So during my journey at IISER Kolkata, I was also not very much trained in mathematics, so I had to also. So ecology was not only just looking at the wildlife, going into the field. It was also about understanding nature, basically, which is very hard to do using equations. So you had to learn mathematics too. And I was able to work with Robert on tropical tree rainforests, and because of his motivation, because of his input, I was able to do a PhD in University of Zurich, where basically I was working on understanding biodiversity collapse, which is basically what this talk is going to be. So in Zurich, I came from India, and was that's a big challenge because the PhD was an entire new field in an entire different area with no basically good background on the questions that I'm going to talk about, like biodiversity collapses. So I had to do a lot of hard work. But anyway, today I'm going to tell you about the challenges in forecasting future biodiversity collapse. So yes, I guess you all have probably heard about words such as global change, climate change, etc. But what does it actually look like? It could look like this, for instance, deforestation as it's happening for palm oil plantation in Indonesia. Or it could be coral reef bleaching that's happening in entire worldwide in marine environment. Or it could be bushfires in California, for instance, or in Eastern Australia during summer. Or glacier melts, as shown here, is a period of difference in 10 years in Denali Glacier in Alaska. For instance, in the above one, it's I think just a difference of 10 years, and you could see the glacier has retreated and it's almost all green. So when you think about such global changes, these changes occur in massive scale and could lead to extinction of species. Indeed, this graph shows here that as human population keeps on increasing, there is the extinction of species also is increasing. So this is a very good correlation about how increases in population growth is correlated with extinction of species. So this is also a recent trend on global biodiversity. And what I mean by biodiversity is basically all different species of different taxa, from plants to insects to marine organisms like fish, or to, for instance, snow leopards. So as you can see, there's a negative trend. So above one means, below one means the populations or the species such as snow leopards, the numbers are declining over the years. And when you expand this graph, and group it to different groups of organisms, like freshwater. What does freshwater means is basically all the organisms that live in lakes, ponds, streams that are fresh in freshwaters, basically. And green is the marine environment, basically all the organisms living in the marine oceans, for instance. Terrestrial means all the organisms that live in land, such as, elephants, for instance, lions, or snow leopards, or herbivores, for instance, giraffes, etc. So as you can see, all of these are actually declining over time, and this is a very concerning scenario. Now, when I talk about these global trends when decline, what do I mean actually? So this is another example of historic whale collapses due to whale fishing that occurred back in 1900s by countries like Japan, or North European countries such as Norway, Denmark, Finland, and also some North American countries. As you could see, at some point in time, there were at least like 30,000 blue whales, or even more than 30,000 fin whales. And now they have, and due to over-harvesting, overfishing of these whales, they have almost at the brink of collapse, as you can see. Now, in the context of India, how does it look like? So this is a vegetation index plot of Asia, especially India here. As you can see, the green basically shows where human population has not grown much, and or where vegetation is almost a bit intact. As you can see, there's mostly red in northern India, and there's green in northeast India, mostly in Arunachal Pradesh, and the Western Ghats here, for instance, and some parts in Orissa. But now in 2009, you can see there is a human impact of human population has increased a lot. So the lots of green here has now become red even here in Assam, for instance, and lots of over in near the Orissa region. So now this is kind of concerning, because what exactly is happening, for instance, not only in India, but all over the world, could have huge consequences on other ecosystem services and functions. So what are the consequences of defoundation or the loss of biodiversity? So when you have this declining trends of, for instance, that I showed was the collapses of wells or collapses of other species, what could actually happen if, if human population growth could actually leads to extirpation of species? So there was this wonderful experiment done in Kenya and known as the long-term Kenyan experiment, where they had two large landscapes, and in one of the landscape, they removed or relocated all the herbivores, such as giraffes or elephants, or for instance, cattle, or and I think boars that are, greater than 15 kilograms from the plot entirely. And on another plot, they kept all the biodiversity, all these animals intact. So basically one plot was an experimental plot, and the other plot was kept intact. And they monitored what happened to the landscape where you remove all these big herbivores, for example, the giraffes or elephants. What happened to that entire landscape? So what they found is that in the control, which is basically the landscape where nothing was perturbed, everything was remained intact, in that experimental plot, the number of dung piles obviously was very high, and in the experimental plot, there are almost 0 dung piles. And this has huge ramifications in the functions and services that the landscape provided. For instance, in the experimental plot, the amount of bushfires increased significantly here. The amount of diseases, the disease prevalence also increased. And also the water quality and the functions associated with water also decreased a lot. In addition to this, the soil quality here, AMF, decreased significantly, shown by the negative here. Photosynthesis rate decreased, transpiration rates decreased. So just the removal of these herbivores completely changed the entire landscape, and that further cascaded through other plant-animal interaction. For instance, here, food production. Oh, sorry, not food production. Here it's basically the fungal plant interaction. Basically, this one, the amount of the amount of fungi growing on fruits that actually disturb the entire plant fungal interaction network, as well as, for instance, there was a food production here due to nectars involving plant pollinator interaction decreased, and shoot production also decreased, which impacted the regeneration of small plants. And furthermore, what happened is that pollination index, limitation index here increased, which basically means that if pollination limitation index increased, food production decreased consequently. So the amount of food produced in that particular landscape decreased significantly, and the number of juvenile plants or the flowering plants that grew in the landscape decreased so much that it almost affected the water quality and the soil quality of the landscape. On the other hand, the geochemical processes such as carbon cycling also decreased significantly, and this has huge ramification because carbon cycling is very important in maintaining the stability of the atmosphere. And also, for instance, the soil erosion increased significantly. So just the removal of these herbivores from that landscape for a small amount of time had a huge consequences on the entire landscape. So coming back to this figure is that when this historic collapses of whale species happen, there was probably some significant impact on the marine environment, It's just that we were not able to monitor them because it requires a lot of resources, a lot of money, a lot of equipment. So the question now becomes is that since human population is going to keep on increasing, and we will not be able to control human population, so that means species extinction will keep on increasing. Now, this is another example, a famous example of Atlantic codfish, and which you probably have heard about the cod liver oil, which collapsed in 1992 due to huge over-harvesting of that species. As you could see, harvesting started around 1900s, and it suddenly collapsed in just 90 years because they kept on over-harvesting this fish a lot. Now, the problem, the challenge then becomes is that how do you predict this collapse? So basically, can we look at this data of population numbers and say that, okay, that population is going to collapse? Now, how do we do that? So this is a big challenge now in the face of climate change, because we know species will keep on going extinct. So of course, we cannot just go into the field or in the rainforest or in the forest and do some, kill animals to understand how we predict extinction or what happens, right? So what we can do, however, is do some experiments on bacteria or single cell organisms like protozoa or insects, or even do some computer simulations to actually understand, firstly, what happens when species goes to extinct, and secondly, can we predict such extinction of species? So this is an example computer simulation of a population abundance over time, which is basically at this red dot, you start harvesting that species, like, start killing some numbers of this population. And you can see if you keep on perturbing, which is basically this perturbation could be like warming, or it could be, for instance, harvesting, or like basically increasing the mortality of this population. And what happens is that when this perturbation starts around this red line around 70 time points, the population initially fluctuates, then declines, and finally collapses. So when we look at these particular population numbers, and which is the abundance, the numbers of the individuals of that population, the questions that arises are, why does a population respond the way it does here, right? Why does it fluctuate like this? Why does it just doesn't go extinct immediately, for instance? What factors contribute to how a population respond to environmental perturbation? What this means is that why does this population try to revert back? And does it have any consequences? Does it try to recover? So now, can we predict this collapse before we see a decline? So basically analyzing only this part of this time series, or looking at this part of the time series, this part of the data, can we predict the collapse beforehand? So this is a huge challenge. So there are various methods, but one of the foremost methods that we have developed is the early warning signals, which I will go into details. So what are these early warning signals? So this is, again, the dynamics of the population. As you see, it fluctuates over time and collapses at around this point. Now, when this happens, right, when this population starts declining, going extinct, there are some clues that gets left behind in the numbers of this population. And these clues are what are known as early warning signals. Now, these early warning signals these clues are basically statistical signals or statistical clues. And two of those statistical clues are the autocorrelation coefficient and variance. I'm going to talk about it in detail in the next slide. But just to give you an idea, what happens is as the population starts declining, what happens is that autocorrelation starts increasing and variance in this abundance time series starts increasing. So what this says is that before the population collapses, you could actually see an increase in autocorrelation or variance, which would basically say that maybe that we could in fact predict collapses of species. So basically what happens is even before you see a decline in this abundance data or the population numbers, you actually observe an increase in autocorrelation and variance, which basically says that maybe we will be able to predict population collapses or population extinctions. But let's see, I mean, this is just some mathematical theory right now. So to give you just an example of what I mean by autocorrelation, this is basically what correlation means. So basically you have a y variable, you have an x variable, and you plot these two against each other, and then you see that this y is related to x, and they are correlated by around 0.84%, not 8%, but the correlation coefficient is 0.84, which is Pearson correlation coefficient. So this is correlation between x and y. Now autocorrelation, on the other hand, is the correlation of a variable x with itself, right? So x is plotted against x minus 1, xi minus 1, and you try to plot a relationship, and you basically get a autocorrelation coefficient, which is the alpha here. Anyway, so how do we test this method, and how do we check that whatever the theory that has developed can actually be useful in predicting population collapse? So we can do some computer simulations as well as small scale experiments. So let's look at some computer simulations. So this is basically, again, computer simulations of population abundance over time on the x-axis, and the y-axis, the population size. So each line is a population simulation. It's a population basically, and all these are replicate populations. So I know that around 800 time point, the whole of all these populations collapses, right? But I'm just not showing it in both these cases. And these are for two different parameter ranges of genetic variation, which is basically factor intrinsic to this population. So the challenge now is that if we look at just this highlighted time series, when we look with our naked eye, we will not be able to say that these populations, these replicate populations, are going to collapse at some point, right? I mean, there is no trend almost, and any naive individual looking at this won't be able to say whether this population is going to collapse. Now the challenge is that, can we look at this, analyze this time series data, and actually predict population collapse with the statistical signals that I just showed, like variance and autocorrelation? So basically, can you use autocorrelation, this theory, and basically predict such population collapses? Okay, so let me show you some results. So here are different parameter values of the population, just for sensitivity analysis. And then on the y-axis is the Kendall-Stowe correlation coefficient. Just a takeaway message from this figure is that all the values above 0 will indicate that we are able to predict accurately population collapses, and values below 0 would indicate that we are not able to predict population collapses. So let's see how the results. So what we see is that the results are really bad. Almost, it's like 50-50. It's like flipping a coin. You flip a coin, and if it comes head, you say it's going to collapse. If it comes tails, you say it's not going to collapse. So it's almost like useless basically. So like almost half of the points are above 0, and almost other half of the points are below 0. Basically, these signals are not really that good in informing population collapses, as you can see in both the cases. So what the ideal scenario should be is that all these points should be above 0, but it's not. But in some cases, for instance, here in some parameter ranges, you do see here, for instance, in this parameter range, you do see that almost 90% of the data is above 0, that in some rare cases, you are actually able to predict such collapses. Which is useful in a way. This information is definitely useful. So now, looking at this figure, basically, as you can see, these early warning signals, or these clues that I showed you, are not really that good. So now, how do we improve the performance, or how do we improve these signals? How do we improve our predictability of population collapses? So coming back to this example of Atlantic Cod Collapse in 1992, so what I didn't tell you is that as the Atlantic cod fish collapsed in 1992, the body size or the size of the fish also started declining, which means that as the population started declining and went extinct, the body size of the fish started declining. So it means almost in all these studies that I have shown, almost none of the studies take information from body size. So what about body size? Why are we not looking at body size of the individuals, for instance? So basically the question then remains is, can we extract information from size of this fish, for instance, or size of any organism that might improve our forecasting ability of collapses? So to do this, that first, again, we did some model simulations, which did some mathematical modeling, which it's a bunch of equations. And what we basically asked is, how do we improve this that I showed before? How do we basically shift all these black black points above this zero line, right? So basically this is shown here for the same parameter value is the AR1 and SD, as you could see. And so the ideal scenario would be to have all these points above zero, right? So now what I do is that I include body size or size information of the population with this signals. And what we observe is that there was significant improvement in the signals. As you could see, almost 90% or 80% of these data points are above zero now. So which shows that, right, we could actually extract body size information from species and could use it to predict population collapses with some amount of accuracy. Now, this was again some model simulations, right? This was not real data. So what we can do is that we can do some experiments, small scale experiments, such as on small cell organisms like bacteria or protozoa. And that's what we did. So we did some experiments on this single cell organism known as an ascenial volvox that we collected from some ponds in Swiss lakes in Switzerland. Here is me with sampling with a colleague of mine. So in this experiment, what we did is that we put this particular protozoan species, per single cell organism, in different fluxes with different replicates, and did some climate warming experiment where we push the population to three different treatments. One of them was that warming. We increased the temperature of these organisms where they were being grown, for instance, the flask, by 0.4 degrees centigrade every day, and slow warming, which was like 0.2 degrees centigrade every day, till the populations collapse. And there was this control treatment where none of this warming happened. And we then tracked population numbers and average body size. For instance, the size of these individuals, size of these organisms as they over time. So I'm going to show you for the slow warming treatment some experimental time series data. So on the x-axis is the days of the experiment, and on the y-axis is the body size or the size. How big is it? How big the individual of an individual organism? It is in micrometer, by the way. Forgot to put the notification here. So which is micrometer, by the way. It's average body size in the micrometer, which is basically visualized in a microscope. So what happened is that here, and this is for two different good and poor. I'm not going to go into details. This is just very different factors. So what happens is that over days, as the flask environment was warmed over time, slowly, the populations, as you can see, these are replicates. Each line is a replicate flask, and they collapsed at around day 40 in both the cases. Here they collapsed much more earlier, but yeah, so they collapsed at some point. And you could see there's so much fluctuations, so much fluctuations. And on the left side is the average body size, the size of the organisms as they collapse. And you can see the average body size also declined before the populations collapse. So of course, when you look at it, when you have all this information, you can always say that, oh, there's a negative trend in the population abundance, so it's going to collapse. The challenge, of course, is to just look at this part of the time series and analyze this part of the time series to actually predict future collapse that happen here, right? So basically what we did is that we analyzed only this part of this time series that I evaluated, and then try to see if the signals that I just described before could actually inform us about the future collapses. So again, going to show you the results. Here is the Kendall-Stau coefficient, correlation coefficients. Again, the takeaway message is that all the values above 0 would mean that we are able to accurately predict collapses before they collapse. And values below 0 would indicate we were not able to predict collapses. This is for standard deviation or variance, and this is the autocorrelation coefficient, another signal that I discussed, and for 3 different treatments. What we found is that statistical signals of collapse were very poor. That means they were not able to predict population collapse at all. So these signals are really not good enough, So now what we do, since we also monitored body size of individuals, when we include body size information with these signals, SD and AR1, we see that there was significant improvement in this performance of these signals, and we were able to forecast future collapses beforehand. Right, so to sum up is that these early warning signals that I told you about, they are sometimes good, but sometimes bad. And when you have information from body size, the size of the individual, this could actually improve the prediction of future biodiversity collapse in response to changes in the climate. And there are also new approaches that have been developed, such as many machine learning approaches, Bayesian stats, and deep learning approaches. These have not been very helpful yet, like especially machine learning approaches. And although deep learning approaches have just been recently developed, but and I'll show you one of the results that deep learning tried to predict uses of deep learning in prediction of population collapses. So this is an example paper from one of the colleagues. So here is the state. Here state means this is again computer simulations and not real data, by the way. So this is state, which means it could be population size or anything. And here the bifurcation occurs. That is, here the population, if it's a population, it collapses. This is 3 different types of bifurcation: fold bifurcation, half bifurcation, transcript. These are different types of bifurcation, or very much used in nonlinear terms, used in nonlinear dynamics, but I'm not going to go into detail. But these are different types of transitions or collapses population can experience, for instance. And this is the log autocorrelation. It's written lag A1C here, but just letting you know, this is the same thing that I presented right now is the autocorrelation. As you could see, as the population here, for instance, collapses, you could see there's an increase in this autocorrelation, indicating that okay, this population is experiencing some problems and might collapse. Similarly, here in transcritical, you see an increase. Again, it's the same in the variance, you see an increase in all these cases. Now, what about deep learning is that, I mean, here they do increase, but they increase very late. In some cases it does increase, but in some cases it does not. I mean, the approaches have been developed, but deep learning, for instance, in this case, they use simulated data, of course, but also empirical data. But the thing is that with deep learning, it is very data intensive tool. So you need quite lots and lots of that data first to train it and then use it for prediction. But the problem is that we don't have so much data, because it's wildlife data, such as monitoring data of birds, for instance. It's very difficult to monitor them, very difficult to monitor, for instance, even big animals like tiger, or for instance, snow leopards. For instance, snow leopards are notoriously difficult to monitor. So in case of ecology and in biodiversity collapses, I mean, although we are making strides of progress in monitoring data, deep learning could still, there's a long way for us to use deep learning in predicting collapse. Of course, you can use deep learning in predicting transition in some other parts, like other network, social networks, or for instance, what other, or maybe climate data, where you have information about atmospheric CO2 and etc. So the challenges in forecasting collapses is that time series data, this is the most important data, the point challenge is that we don't have data, because it's very difficult to go into the field and monitor, for instance, the number of lions in this year over a lion in this part of the reserve, and you can't monitor every year, because there's so much money and resources are involved, especially, for instance, in the marine environment. You cannot you cannot capture whale population, you cannot capture whales and track them over time. It's only based on image captures or recapture methods that has been used in wildlife biology. So technically, in predicting biodiversity collapses, I mean, we have a huge challenge. The challenge is there's very less data. And one of my students, Alex, he was a master's student, and he and I worked with this specific question, basically time series. So how much data do we need to accurately predict collapses? So basically, how many data points that we need to analyze before we could accurately predict collapses? So what we found is that we need at least 9 to 15 data points and 9 to 15 generation long time series. Now, to give you an overview of what this means is that, let's take the case of an elephant, okay? Now, the elephant has roughly a generation time of 25 years. So in the context of an elephant population, we need to at least track them for 220 years. 220 years we have to track them, or 220 years of data we need to actually accurately predict elephant population collapses if they happen in the future. So this is a massive challenge, and of course their methods have been still developed, and monitoring programs have been increased, but we still lack monitoring data on wildlife. With that, I would like to end my talk and tell you that, I mean, of course, human population growth has been exponentially increasing, particularly in India, and with that, there would require a lots of space to be made for human populations to sustain, and this would result in deforestation, extinction of species, and of course, with the additional load of warming in the climate, we are in for a rough ride in the next 20 years. And it would be a very big challenge to actually, preserve biodiversity, because biodiversity preservation is very important, as I've shown in this, as shown in the Kenya long-term experiment, where just a few, such a few species of herbivores, removal of few species of herbivores had huge impact in the entire landscape. So with that, I would like to thank my funding agencies and, of course, Assam Artificial Intelligence Initiative for inviting me to give you a talk. I would also like to tell you that I'm fascinated about why there are so many species, why there are so many organisms living in this world, how do we preserve them, what are the challenges that we have, particularly in India. How do we preserve them? These are the questions that are going to be important and pertinent in the near future. And to arrive at this position where I'm doing my postdoctoral research on similar topics of biodiversity collapse and understanding biodiversity patterns. Um, I had to really go out of my way of studying ecology and evolutionary biology apart from textbooks where uh, most I think masters and bachelor's program don't. I don't know right now, but when I was doing my masters, there was not much books about, at least, or not much syllabus about ecology, and it is very important that the people know what is happening and what ecology is, and ecology and evolution studies, what it does and what are we doing, so that more people come up and with new solutions regarding to find possible solutions about preservation or biodiversity. With that, I would like to thank you for attending my talk. Thanks. I would like to take any questions. Please feel free to ask.
Thank you so much, Gaurav. And this was an excellent talk. And it made us think like in so many levels, that how important these things are. Like, because I feel like at so many times we don't think about this deep enough unless someone shows us. We are so dependent on data and statistics. Unless someone proves it, we don't think about it deep enough.
We don't at all. I mean, this is the problem, I think. I mean, while I was studying my master's in biology, I mean, we were always taught about cell biology, molecular biology, and about human survival, human diseases, but we are not at all taught about what's biodiversity means, what impact it's going to have when you have loss of species or extinction, or say what is going to do to us. It's not really known, and this is really important. And I hope people get to realize that understanding biodiversity and going to the field of ecology and evolution is really important to tackle these problems.
Yes. And I'm so glad that your talk was, it was very easy to understand for me, who is not at all related to the field. I'm like super, like huge thank you for that. You understood exactly how to explain it for our audience. And okay, so also I just want to say that my laptop just died, even though I had the charger plugged in. So I'm logging in, like, so you'll see two logins from, so just in case it was confusing. Okay, so I'm gonna read out a few questions. I'll still I think Hriday's question was already answered while you were talking, but I can just read them out. So he has asked, can we use AI ML based techniques to model the early warning signals, example body size of Atlantic cod? And
I mean,
if you want to add something.
Yes. I mean, it has already been done. Like there have been a couple of techniques developed, but ultimately, I mean, of course, these signals, when you do it simple, like lots of data, like when you have, like with computer simulations, even the simple statistical tools that I showed, or Bayesian statistics that I use are really informative in predicting collapses, but it's all depends on the data, right? But with machine learning approaches, I mean, with the problem is that it is data intensive. That is the real problem, and we don't have data. And that is, so I think this machine learning approach, or the deep learning approach that was developed, it's basically could be used not for, I don't think so right now, at least not for predicting biodiversity, but could be used for other stuff like transitions in climate or transitions in atmospheric CO2, like or other stuff where we have lots of data on, but not especially for wildlife. I don't think so. It's that useful, at least. There were some couple of studies done, but yeah, right now it's not. But maybe, I mean, in the future when we have data, definitely. I mean, it's better than most statistical tools that have been developed. Yeah.
Yes. Hriday, I hope your question was answered, and I'll move on to the next question. So Sushir has asked, so interesting session, Gaurav. The collapse
Thank
may
you.
be affected by different parameters. How do you consider or get those parameters while estimating the collapse?
I mean, the thing is that we have this parameters where I didn't show like lots of different parameters. We use the collapse was not caused by the parameters because I know, like for instance, what I control. So so in my population, what I did is basically increase the mortality, like kill the number of individuals, and that is what caused the collapse. And the other parameters, because I do for a range of parameters, I know that these parameters were not actually causing the collapse, but it definitely affected the dynamics. So basically, one of the projects that I worked on was how different parameters could impact the dynamics, how the fluctuations that you see before the population collapses, and does that impact?
Right.
For instance, so as I showed you, in some cases you see the signals were performing really good, right? In one of the cases that I saw, let me maybe share you again. Just a second. Do you see the screen? Yes. Okay. So here, for instance, you see this, for in some parameter case, you can predict really well, for instance, but in the other, so basically I wanted to understand whether parameters affect the dynamics and affect our predictability. So basically in some cases, some parameter ranges you do predict and some you don't, for instance. But yeah, it is again data intensive.
Yes, yes. And so since we are at the data question, there is another interesting question
Yes.
by Ravin Sharma. So
Yes.
he has asked, could you please elaborate on the data collection step
Right.
from leopards or any other animal before training these kind of ML models?
Right. So so basically, so here, for instance, for I didn't use it for the. I'm just showing you examples of the wild leopards, but I did. Sorry, snow leopards, but I didn't use it. I used like single cell organisms and organisms such as birds and insects. So in that, how the problem with snow leopards is like they are very camouflaged, which so mostly the data collection is for image capture. So basically, you have this what you call this cameras in certain types of certain areas of the forest, and where basically if a tiger or a snow leopard passes by, it basically automatically takes a photograph basically through heat sensors, because if the animal passes, you basically take the camera automatically takes a picture. So we go through these image captures, and basically we through image classification, you basically identify, because all of this, for instance, all of these snow leopards have a different stripe pattern. Based on this, we know which you can actually classify which individual we have captured multiple times, and based on this, we have estimates of abundance, right? So over years, you collect this data and you have this abundance data, but of course, we will miss a lot of snow leopards because installing these cameras is not easy, and we don't even know where to install this camera. So sometimes you see, sometimes you don't. So these data, again, are not really that informative about actual population size. So that's how we monitor the abundance, and that's how we collect the data. And based on this data, we do look at this abundance time series, for instance. That's how we do it, for instance.
Very interesting.
For in the case of Atlantic codfish, for instance, here it's basically through, for instance, there are various techniques. One is one technique is the electrofishing that is done, but this is also again difficult because you cannot go into the ocean and electrofish everything, because there are so many individuals you'll miss. So basically, it's an estimate of actual population size. We don't actually know the we'll never know the actual population's abundance of the Atlantic, of the fish in a marine environment in the ocean. It's of course like a predicted estimate of the actual population size. So it's very difficult to actually monitor these populations. But of course, it requires a lot of effort, resources, and technology. Of course, yeah. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that I can only imagine.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we have two more questions, slightly
Right.
related.
Yes. Sure.
So Shishir has asked us, also, can you give some idea on where a student pursue this kind of interdisciplinary research in India?
Right. So yeah, good question. It's so I forgot to tell you about this actually. So definitely, I mean, I don't know right now. Back when I was doing my high secondary, after high secondary, I don't think any college in India was providing such like a course or what you call degree on basically ecology or all this field that I'm doing. It's very interesting, of course, definitely, and I think what separates like European countries or American countries is that they really invest a lot of research in this field that I'm doing. So in India, it's not so much. It's mostly about biology, core biology subjects. So technically, right now, I don't know in Assam how much it has been, how much the course structure has changed, but definitely where I studied in IISER Kolkata, now it is changing. The IISERs, if you want to look at, or even other NISER, National Institute of Science Education Research, and even I think some North Indian university in Delhi, like Delhi universities, do provide some. JNU, for instance, JNU also has a good ecology and environmental department. So not many institutes as far as I'm aware, but yeah, IISERs you can look at, and there is also this huge master's program or bachelor's program called wildlife. I forgot. It is by NCBS, National Center for Biological Sciences, where they give you a 2-year course about understanding ecology and evolution, and basically they help you. They teach you all these different subjects about monitoring, about evolution, about ecology, all that I've shown, how these experiments are done, and you do some cool experiments in the field. You can go into the like Sundarbans, you can go into Lakshadweep and do some cool experiments there, and you can go into like all these tropical cool places where you can do experiments on like geckos, or not experiments, like observe geckos, butterflies, and all these different organisms, and it's a really great experience. So I forgot what the initiative is called. It's, I think, Wildlife Institute of India or something. I'm not really sure, but it's a course provided by National Center for Biological Sciences, Bangalore. So it's a 2-year course. It's a master's, and I really recommend, because this opens up a lot of what I actually talked about.
Yeah, that's actually very. I'm sure like a lot of people will be so interested to at least explore or know about, like try to find out what these options are. And when you talked about all the fieldwork options, I think it's only making this more attractive. Like apart from the impact, like it's
right. I mean, even in India, I have some colleagues who are doing amazing fieldwork in the foothills of Himalayas, in Sikkim, and all these beautiful places where they are collecting samples from,
right.
It's amazing. I mean, it's also a great experience, I would say.
And the importance of the data, right? Like whatever they get,
absolutely.
Like not everyone will even be able to do as much, like so. And thanks, Gaurav. And I have one last question.
Yes, sure.
By Nisha. And she has asked, sir, as you said, for elephants require 9 to 15 generation long data. Is there some way for collecting data for birds?
I mean, yes. I mean, of course. I mean, here there are so many. I mean, in Switzerland, like Switzerland, they invest like so much money in biodiversity research. I mean, of course, in India, it's not so much. But in Switzerland, what they do is that they have this, they have this particular nest, artificial nest. They place thousands and thousands of artificial nests, where they basically put some cameras or some kind of camera, small cameras, or there's some or what do you call this? I forgot the actual word. Anyway, I forgot what the actual word was. So basically, they put some cameras. They know how many of them are there, and during every summer, what they go is that they go there and try to catch them through. The nest is built in a way that they are able to remotely catch them and tag them. For instance, they catch them, they take their DNA. You could do DNA analysis. You could look at how much these birds are related to each other. And that's how you basically track over time. Yeah, well, of course, but it's very difficult. It's lots of money required, lots of resources required, but it is possible. And there are also other ways like nets that they do, but it's a different job altogether, though. Yeah.
Wow, that's interesting, because now I'm wondering if there are, organizations which specifically fund, these kind of studies in India, because sometimes.
No, yeah, I mean, you are right. I mean, it's a challenge. I mean, the field is still developing in India. I mean, that is an idea that that is an idea that people could work. Like, even if I come back to India at some point, I would try to there's so much potential. For instance, under national forests in Assam, for instance, is so biodiversity, and nothing is known about the biodiversity. I mean, it's known. I mean, it's not as known at the international level, that it could be very beneficial to monitor them, and actually the causes of decline or increase of abundance. It's so many things to be done.
Right. Yeah, that's amazing. I got to learn so much about the bigger picture, like balance that that is meant to be, and how to that's really interesting. I just have to ask something to Sishir, actually. Sishir, I can't see the WhatsApp, the YouTube link anymore. So I'm just, if there are any more questions, you will probably have to read that for me.
No, yeah, that was the last question.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Gaurav. We had an amazing session.
It was a privilege to give this talk, and I'm really thankful that you guys invited me to give this talk. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gaurav.
No problem. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Yeah.